Jeep, 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 Jeep. Why are they all fucking Jeeps? Why are they all Jeeps?
Hello, everybody. It is the evening of November 9th. My name is Justin Comer, and you are listening to Rock Hard Caucus, Iowa's best and only podcast.
Sponsored by Jeep.
Jeep. Jeep. Jeep. I'm joined by Evan Jones, as usual.
Yo.
Hello, Evan. Good to see you again. And back from a bit of a hiatus, we've got Natalie Harwood on the line.
Hi.
Welcome back, Natalie.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you again. How have things been going for you? Let's do a little check-in before we get into the episode. How you feeling? About
me?
the election, specifically.
I feel absolutely nothing. I feel no happiness and no sadness at the same time. So I have just felt dead inside. I wanted to be happy and I wanted to be able to revel in the fucking Trump loss, but I feel nothing because I just am anticipating 4 years of crushing austerity and increasing imperial engagements abroad, and I feel nothing. So
Cool, just totally flat. Yeah.
yep, flat.
Yeah, I think limbo is a good description for what to expect for Biden. You know,
Yep.
4 years of limbo.
Just pausing and are, barreling towards apocalypse and decay.
We're starting off with extreme optimism.
And I did not vote for Joe Biden. I said I wouldn't and I didn't. So fuck you. Fuck you.
Well, I think that's fuck you is a good way to start things off. We've got tonight a very important guest. The first time we've ever had, I think it's the first time we've ever had a journalist on the program. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Other than
Yeah.
Jalen.
Yeah, sure. We're typically kind of an anti-journalism podcast, so we tend to have more of an oppositional role to journalists. We threaten them online and ridicule
Well, it's
them.
more editorialist.
That's
than
true.
Journalist, I think.
That's true. But this has been a long time coming. This guy was the subject of one of our very early episodes, episode 6. We talked quite a bit about this fellow. We also covered one of his articles for the Iowa Informer maybe a couple months ago. Please welcome to the Rock Hard Caucus Hall of Fame, Aaron Calvin.
Thank you for having me.
Aaron, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you. First things first, thoughts on Carson King's current role in Iowa pop culture?
Carson King has a current role. I'm not caught up.
Well, maybe Aaron knows more than I do.
Okay, Aaron, fill us in.
Well, I we don't chat a lot very often, but I have seen via the local television news stations, Channel 5 in Des Moines, WI, that Mr. King has become employed by a local roofing company. And the roofing company is in turn using this new hire to generate some publicity. And I'm sure that they're a very quality roofing company.
That sounds about right for Mr. King.
So for people who do remember the first time we ever uttered the name Aaron Calvin on this podcast, Aaron is the guy who wrote about Carson King in the Des Moines Register and shortly thereafter departed from the Des Moines Register, to put it in neutral terms. So Aaron, what have you been up to since your departure from the Des Moines Register? What was that, like a year and change ago?
Yeah, about. I've been writing for various different outlets, The Guardian, Vice, BuzzFeed News, a lot of stuff for the Iowa Informer, which is a great Ames-based local news outfit that does a lot of good journalistic work that doesn't get covered at places like the Register. And yeah, I became kind of unemployed, and then the rest of the world became kind of unemployed. So it's been a wild ride. At first I was like, wow, my life really kind of fell apart there, and then the whole world fell apart. So
Yeah, we
it's
caught
actually, as far as things go, it's kind of evened out.
You mentioned The Intercept, and you told me, well, and I saw you tweeting about it, you were covering the election here in Iowa for The Intercept, correct?
Yeah, I went to a Trump rally a few weeks ago, and then I was at the Hotel Savory in downtown Des Moines to catch Teresa Greenfield's concession speech.
How was that? I haven't read or heard her concession speech.
Well, it was very short. It was around like 5 minutes. She talked about how, she's a scrappy farm kid, kind of hit all the usual notes. Didn't mention that the scrappy farm kid also, got millions and millions of dollars from real estate and pharmaceutical companies and then lost. But, it was actually kind of like a huge bummer. I was sitting, in a conference room, basically just me and some other journalists. The TV journalists would every 15 minutes like yell into their cameras about how nothing was happening, and just watch the results roll in. It was kind of awkward and sad, and I had most of the piece pre-written anyway. I didn't know that she would lose, and I didn't know that the Democrats would lose so badly across the state.
Yeah.
But obviously, having lived in Iowa and experienced Iowa and been yelled at by many Iowans.
Yes. We dream of the kind of engagement that you get.
Yeah, what do we have?
But we'll be careful what we wish for, because I understand, you went through a lot there.
Yeah. Even if you don't think so, or if you don't want to, that many people telling you to kill yourself, kind of.
Yeah.
It gets at you a little bit, but yeah, it's all water under the bridge now. I think we've all moved on from that.
Yeah.
A lot of people are blocked,
Oh man, I can only imagine. But yeah, it seems like you really flipped it into a pretty successful independent media career, and like definitely the best reporter for Black Lives Matter shit in Des Moines and just Des Moines shit in general recently.
Well, thank you. Yeah. You can't I never foresaw that kind of thing happening, especially like in Des Moines. But when it all started to happen, I had already been talking to the website's editor, Gavin, and we kind of decided that, nobody's going to write about this the right way, especially in Des Moines. So yeah, we should do it.
Yeah, the Iowa Informer is one of the few, media organizations that I don't think we've ever trashed on our show. We tend to, appreciate the reporting that goes on there. Yeah, you mentioned you went to a Trump rally.
Yeah.
Where was that?
I was at the Des Moines airport on the tarmac. It was not one of the ones where he left everyone freezing, because it was a pretty nice night, actually. And the Des Moines airport's pretty small, so it would be hard to get trapped there, even if you were, very immobile. But it was a really interesting experience.
Yeah, I guess my question is, so you said at least somewhat surprised by how badly the Democrats did in Iowa in this election. Do you think that your experiences like reporting on the election leading up to it give you any kind of special insight into like what happened?
I would say that, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about this both nationally and in Iowa. And I know that especially the Iowa Democratic machine will probably be reluctant to draw these kinds of lessons. But in my reporting for The Intercept on the night of the election, a younger Democratic activist who does have some standing in the party reached out to me on background, just to kind of tell me about how mad he was and upset he was that the Democrats kind of biffed it really hard in Iowa, which is, I don't think, the kind of swing state that it might have been during the Obama years or anything like that.
Right.
But, with the way the pandemic has been handled and the way it's all spiraling out of control and continuing to do so, it shouldn't have been hard for Democrats to at least gain some kind of ground, or at least not lose so much ground. But because of the fact that they are still so, controlled and married to the kind of Vilsacian corporatist politics that they practice, and I think that the Iowa Democratic Party is very similar to a lot of Iowa media. It's not really about Iowa. It's about using the things that Iowa is known for, like politics, like the caucus, stuff like that,
yeah,
to kind of develop the career where you get out of Iowa and then go do something else. A lot of politics reporters at the Register have gone on to more lucrative gigs at CNN or the Washington Post or something like that. And, I think the Democrats function very much as like a party line democracy in that sense. And if they haven't seen from this election that they can't depend on the 2 or 3 urban centers in Iowa to get them through, and that they're going to have to start talking to people who live in rural areas and start bringing things to the table that might be appealing to, either people who live and work in the agricultural industry or at least live in rural places that have seen a lot of serious divestment. And a lot of that occurred under the helm of Democrats like Vilsack, like the other governor who
Chet Culver.
Chet Culver, thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, like Culver, and under Obama and stuff like that, and Vilsack was very much tied to the Obama administration. But yeah, I think if there was any lessons that I took from reporting recently for The Intercept and both on Iowa in general over the last 2 years, I think it's that the Democratic Party needs to seriously reckon with their messaging and what kind of things that they, are devoted to. I don't know if you've probably seen that viral list that's been going around that I think probably points like maybe too much of like a one-dimensional picture about candidates who support M4A and then lost.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't think it's a coincidence that Abby Finkenauer is up there and lost to Ashley Hinson. I mean, that's pretty. Like, Democrats should be embarrassed about that because that is embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, our conclusion is pretty much that Ashley Hinson was a TV lady, and you just can't beat that,
Right, she was on TV. I think the Chickenhauer thing was more effective than most people would probably want to admit.
I may have missed that. Is that like an attack ad?
They made like a fake Twitter bot called Abby Chickenhauer that was constantly tweeting about how Abby wouldn't debate Ashley Hinson. I don't think that was true, but
yeah, didn't they debate on PBS?
They did. And
I thought everyone but
this
Feenstra
message
did.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, that's another thing too that Gavin Aronson at the Iowa Informer has written about, that I think maybe one of the only media outlets in Iowa who's written about it, about how much misinformation on a local level Republicans in Iowa get out there. And they love to attack journalists like myself, like Liz Lenz, who was a liberal columnist for the Cedar Rapids Gazette, who was fired because of the anger that she drew from GOP activists. And they attack a lot of journalists across the board. And the response from people at the Register at places like that is to kind of like wring their hands and be like, "Oh, don't attack me, please," but not to actually report on. It has the effect that the GOP operatives want, which is to chill reporting on the kind of misinformation that they're spreading, and make it so that if the media brings any kind of special attention to them, they can write it off as being biased.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a minute ago that a lot of Des Moines Register employees, they're just kind of using it as a stepping stone to more national, bigger cities, stuff like that. This may be a personal question, but do you feel like you were perhaps on that path before the incident last year? Did what happened with your Carson King article kind of change your trajectory and make you kind of push you in the direction of like the stuff you're reporting at the Iowa Informer as opposed to the stuff you were writing for the Register?
I don't think that it changed my personal politics a lot. I think I've always kind of felt that every journalist that you read, every person that publishes anything in the newspaper or on the internet or anything, they have politics. If you don't know them, then they're just not like telling you what they are or showing you what they are, basically. And, the Register is an institution. It's a centrist institution at best. It's also like one of the, largest publications in Iowa. And I grew up reading the Register, and I did really enjoy that job, and I did enjoy some of the work that I was able to do. And I did exert what some people would probably see as a political stance while I was there. Sometimes different reporters or like interns or whatever would try to publish things that had the headline "officer involved shooting" in the headline, and I would be like, the police shot somebody, we can say that.
Yeah.
Little things like that. I contended to them at the time, and I still do, that I didn't violate any of their social media policies while I was their employee, so
Yeah.
but in the end they chose their route. I requested they fired me. They gave me the option to do so.
Right. Yeah.
And because I thought they were doing was pretty spineless. I still have a lot of, I had some friends there. The turnover rate's pretty high. I think they all might have moved on at this point. But saying that the place like the Register is a stepping stone, one of the things I think might be a problem for some of the more careerist-focused employees who work there at this point is that the whole thing's pretty precarious for everybody. And I don't love being in the position of being a freelance journalist because I don't have health insurance.
Yeah.
I don't know when my paychecks are coming in or whatever. But I think certain things that I've written this year I wouldn't have been able to do without having gained this weird sort of notoriety in the first place.
Right, sure.
And definitely I think if I was still at the Register when the Black Lives Matter stuff came into focus and George Floyd was killed, I would have been very frustrated probably with the limitations that are put upon reporters. And they still got maced, or in Andrea Sahuri's case,
Right.
Arrested. And I got maced too, everybody got maced.
Yeah.
But I didn't get arrested, so I got out of there pretty quick.
Yeah, DMPD has been really crazy this year.
Well, I don't know if you follow the politics closely in Des Moines or the city council meetings at all, but
They just had one, right?
yeah, they're having one like right now, or
Yeah,
they
okay.
did have one. But like a lot of police departments across America and basically every city, I guess, they're pretty much allowed to act with impunity. So, they're able to get away with whatever they can because they are allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I assume the media reporting has a lot to do with access too. They're afraid to piss off sources.
Paul Parizek.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that is, similar, I think, between the Des Moines Police Department and the Republican Party in the state and nationally, and a commonality between their relationship with journalism and journalists, is that the journalists should know by now that they're going to be treated this way no matter what.
Yes.
So they might as well do more, probably. And that's not to say that people like Andrea aren't doing excellent reporting, because she is, and they are. But as institutions, clearly, there's a lot of deference being paid that isn't reciprocated.
Yes. I mean, you've been on the inside, so I think you have a better idea of this than I would. But it seems like there's this enforced kind of objectivity where you can't report on a situation like the police macing a bunch of children in Des Moines. You can't report on that just truthfully. You have to kind of make it neutral, even when your own reporters are the ones being thrown in jail.
Yeah. And there's a lot of journalists more a national level, really, who are starting to point out, or it's starting to become maybe more younger journalists maybe are becoming more aware of the idea that, you wouldn't just quote a source who has repeatedly lied to you or obfuscated the truth to you in the paper, or not, or if they have some specific bias, you would make sure to note that, or some kind of special relationship, you would definitely note that. And I think we're starting to maybe slowly get further away from just reprinting police statements like they're fact, or that's what happened, even if you were there, and obviously the Register is still doing that. And there's no newspaper in Iowa that would qualify any statement from the police except for obviously the Informer, because I've done that. Yeah, there's a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start getting into your Informer stuff. So the reason we have you on today is for your big investigation into Bruce Gerleman, who is the owner of Jethro's Barbecue. It's a very thorough piece. So I'm curious, where did this come from? When did you decide you wanted to write about this guy?
Well, you guys are based in Iowa City, right?
I'm in Iowa
part?
City. These other two are in Des Moines.
Hey,
Okay.
I have to go. I'm really sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm so grateful to have met you, and I can't wait to hear about the rest of your interview.
Oh, it's nice to meet you too, Natalie.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
Yeah. Okay. So, Evan, you're based in Des Moines, right?
Yes.
So you either have eaten at or are familiar with or have driven by one of the many Jethro's barbecue locations.
Yes.
or
And they're
Splash
very
downtown.
annoying radio ads.
Yes. Well,
Jethro's barbecue.
yeah, they're a big they're a big advertiser. They've got a lot of money. They're probably, I would say, one of the most visible and most obviously powerful restaurant groups in Des Moines. So there's been like a trend, that has kind of a branch kind of the Me Too movement, I think, which I think when people talk about it, maybe we don't talk about how much it's like a journalism centered movement.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like the first institutional power that has kind of been harnessed to get these stories out there is journalism. And a branch of this has been through food media a lot, especially very high profile stuff like the Mario Batali stuff, different exposés about different restaurants and their working conditions. And there's been a growing public reckoning with how broken the food industry is across the board and how much it's rooted in sexism, and not just sexism, but sexual harassment and abuse and racism, and kind of very much rooted in this hierarchical way that all restaurants are traditionally built, starting with the owner and going down.
Well, Aaron, have you ever worked in food service?
I have. Well, I did very briefly when I was like 16. I was like a waiter at a creperie across from the Jordan Creek Mall. And
Okay, yeah.
The restaurant's gone now because it was very bad and I was a bad employee.
Well, yeah, I think those experiences, like when you are a teenager and you're working at a restaurant, like that can be the most enlightening, really, into how that world works.
Well, and the thing is, I think that almost everybody knows how these things work, you
Yes.
know, like, and that's a response that you get to a lot of this reporting, and definitely a response I saw a lot in response to this specific piece is like, oh, we all knew this was happening, you know? So, but it's like one of the reasons why so many former employees of Jethro's and Splash wanted to talk to me about Bruce Gerleman's behavior is because, you know, in the press and in public, even if everybody knew or heard stories or hearsay or rumors about his behavior or how his restaurants were run, there was no actual reporting on it. You know, there was no publicly verifiable or anything reported out.
Yeah, it's more like an open secret. Just everyone knows.
Like social media and all
There's
that.
no source. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And people kind of, I think, you know, when things are the same way for so long, people or kind of get used to just like the way things are, especially in a place like Iowa, like Des Moines. You know, people think things are a certain way and they won't change.
Yeah, and that seems to be, you know, across the board kind of like an Iowan culture thing. Maybe the Midwest at large. I think I brought this up on a recent episode, or maybe when we talked to those South Dakota guys. But like in terms of like politics in Iowa, it's very much like just don't talk about it. Just this is the way things are. You're not going to change them. Don't worry about it. Move on past it. Make your life better.
Right. And I think it's in Iowa and Des Moines that younger people, especially, like you see that most of the people who are out marching for Black Lives are much younger people. Mm-hmm. And the people who are speaking out against the status quo are definitely younger people. So there's definitely a generational friction occurring right now. But yeah, so I think that what really set this story into motion is the story that the report opens with, the encounter between a woman and her two sons with Bruce Gerleman at the newly opened Southside Jethro's. Mm-hmm. And I saw this first when the woman posted her story on Facebook, and it started to attract a little bit of attention because she posted on Facebook because she didn't have any other avenue. Nobody would listen to her, and nobody would do anything about this thing that she felt was really offensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely inappropriate behavior with children, so I think it's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, a recurring theme here in the institutions in Iowa that I've reported on, and my reporting on this kind of one-man supermassive Des Moines institution is that, people only do these things because they believe very strongly that they can get away with it without suffering any consequences.
Much like the police.
Right.
It's all
much
related.
like, the government, the police, anybody doing anything only does as much as what they think that they can get away with, which is also a broader theme in the defunding of local journalism and stuff like that.
So, I mean, we want people to read this, so I don't want us to, give away everything in the piece. But listeners, this is called Sexual Harassment, Booze, and Barbecue Inside Bruce Gerleman's Restaurant Empire. You can find it at the Iowa Informer. So you go into kind of this guy's history, and Bruce made his money in real estate, yes?
Yeah, he has this kind of self-mythology that he's reported that, he started as a mattress salesman and made a bunch of money and flipped it into one of the most lucrative things you could possibly flip it into, which is being a landlord and flipping it into real estate. So that was like the genesis of his first income. And as I get into a little bit in the piece, he came to Des Moines and started getting into different things, tanning salons when they first started to become in vogue in the 80s. But I think super rich people or like very rich people don't make money on their own, And I think I laid out in the piece a strong argument to show that Bruce was helped throughout the 1980s by the city council of Des Moines, and by changing tax laws as Reagan took power, as Terry Branstad took power,
Right, the first time.
Right, the first time. And these people didn't. I'm not like accusing these entities or even the Des Moines City Council of purposefully going out of their way to help them, but one of the city council's main jobs even today is to basically decide who gets lucrative real estate contracts.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, it struck me that Bruce Gerleman really isn't unique. I mean, in the sense that there's guys like this in every Midwestern city, who develop real estate sort of not empires, but in a smallish city like Des Moines. Obviously, he's accumulated a lot of power and a lot of influence.
Right. He's not a billionaire, but in Des Moines, being a millionaire and being a property owner and an employer gives you a lot of power over people.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are some people who would say that the kind of things that we reported on in this piece, that maybe Bruce Gerleman or his romantic partner, who is also given a pretty lengthy aside in the piece, and the managers that worked for him were all private citizens to some degree. But I think the common thread is that these are all people who had power over other people and abused it to one degree or another.
Yes. And yeah, that's something that struck me about this as well. Like what Evan said, I've worked for this guy, but on a smaller scale. In, maybe half of the jobs I've worked, this is kind of an archetype. It's just this is how powerful men especially behave. Once you've attained a certain amount of wealth, a certain amount of power over other people, you're going to abuse that power.
Yeah, he definitely seems like kind of like the small town salesman kind of type for sure.
Yeah, and this is that classic story, Blue Velvet or anything like that, where there is a very real darkness that the entirety of the beautiful white picket fence Americana is built on top of. And to many people for many years, and probably still, because the Informer doesn't have a very huge audience, they believe that Gerleman is something to aspire to,
right.
And what people would think of as being a successful person,
which he is. But
he's got a lot of money, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't want you to give away anything you might be working on, but do you think there could be additional investigations into additional people in these kinds of positions?
Definitely, there's people who have reached out to share more stories about Bruce. One of the second most common response, besides we knew all about this already, was this isn't even the half of it. And it's definitely not even half of what I heard in the the course of reporting this story, everything reported in the story is the most verified and corroborated stuff that we heard. And so more has come out about that. Other people have reached out about that. And other people have reached out a little bit about other local restaurateurs. You could probably guess who they are even, but if you live in Des Moines. But I don't know, this story took a long time to report. There was a lot of legal documentation that I read through. There were a lot of people that I interviewed, and those interviews were very intense. They're like, there's people like sharing with me some of the worst things that ever happened to them.
Right. Yeah.
And things that, if I didn't handle sourcing them appropriately, like, a lot of people who aren't very media literate think that anonymous sourcing is just like people leaving tips or whatever, just like, anonymous messages to me. But everyone in this story is somebody that I knew exactly who they were, and I knew when and where they worked for Bruce Gerleman, and their stories were, I sat down and listened to their stories, then transcribed their stories again and listened to them over and over again. So a story like this is very difficult to report, and that's why they don't get reported often, not just because it was a really strenuous thing for me to do, but because even though we had the story read over by a lawyer and did everything we could to make sure everything was factually correct and reported in good faith, the people who talked to me were very brave just to trust me to tell their story without giving away details that would identify them. Mm-hmm. But also because Bruce Gerleman is known to be an extremely litigious individual.
Right. He can come after you if he wants.
Right. Yeah. We got a pretty solid recommendation from our lawyer that any kind of frivolous lawsuit that would be brought against us would probably not have any merit and would, probably be dismissed. But that would still cost money for me and for the Informer and the Informer's publisher, who, unlike an entity like the Des Moines Register, who could probably afford to do more reporting like this, we don't have lawyers on retainer, and we don't actually have a lot of money at all.
Right. Yeah. And the Des Moines Register, I don't know if Jethro specifically gives them money, but they're supported by the business community of Des Moines, and this would really ruffle some feathers that they probably don't want ruffled. Right.
They would I can personally attest, having worked there, that they would go out of their way to never report a story like this. Not just because of who it would offend, but because it's just not their style at all. This is a newer kind of reporting that I think is very necessary, but it's also not a coincidence that young people like myself, I'm not so young anymore, but
I think you're younger than us, just barely maybe, but
I'm 28. I'm almost 29.
Yeah, okay. I'm 30. Yeah,
I'm 31. Yeah.
Well, there we go.
The youngest one here, you're the baby.
We're not as young as we used to be. Yeah, and but having worked at the Register, I know the way that corporations who feed their more and more tenuous bottom line are able to exert pressure on them, like Hy-Vee, for example. Hy-Vee is a great example of that. They are a very political grocery store and have a lot of money, and use it to advertise, not as much as they used to, but they're still one of the few reliable advertisers. So they get to influence their coverage in all kinds of little ways.
Yeah.
As for Jethro's is really interesting, and I get into this a little bit in the piece. I don't think it's giving too much away, but they're very much connected to Republican politics and conservative politics across the state. And when it comes time for the caucuses, tons of different Republican candidates have spoken at Jethro's. There have been Republican watch parties for Trump debates. Secretary Mike Pompeo met with Bruce Gerleman at one of his Jethro's locations last year.
Wow.
And they also advertise with some, they have their jingles on the radio, but they also specifically advertise with some of the most conservative radio personalities in Des Moines. Like, for example, they're a big advertiser for Heather Burnside's radio show. And if you're a Des Moines person who's been paying a lot of attention, you know that Heather Burnside is married to Paul Perezik, who is the Des Moines Police Department spokesperson. Mm-hmm. So
she's come up on this show a few times now.
Oh yeah, both of them.
Yeah, they have their own missing persons podcast that is very offensive. Some might find it, but
That's in addition to the radio show.
yes,
Oh,
yeah.
maybe I should check out the podcast.
It doesn't
They're our
get
colleagues.
as much attention. Yeah. So yeah, all podcasters, all local podcasters. But
We're all in one big union.
that's the thing about also reporting on a piece like this. And it was difficult to make the choice of including the stuff about Gerleman's longtime romantic partner, Cynthia Fodor, who also is a news anchor at local news station KCCI.
Right.
Because obviously that relationship is very complicated, and it mostly came down to how it affected employees and how her association with Gerleman gave her power over others and how she used that power. But yeah, the thing about Des Moines and a city like Des Moines in the Midwest that's small, it's insular, and everything and everybody is connected. So when you start digging up some parts of something, you'll likely hit on something that affects somebody else who has a lot of power as well.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say about Gerleman is that he's also like super image conscious, which I guess you would kind of expect, but the way that he's kind of aware, I guess, somewhat of his reputation, and then tells his employees to kind of protect him, from anyone who's going to ask questions. And obviously also, like you said, his connections with the media.
Yeah, he's very responsive to, for somebody who is so powerful and has done allegedly so many very not good things to people.
Yeah.
He is astoundingly responsive and self-conscious about how he's viewed by the public and the way that he reacts to different stories that have been reported about him. Just in my interactions alone with him, he originally submitted a pretty tepid statement to us via his lawyer that was pretty boilerplate classic, I didn't do any of this stuff, but if I did, I'm sorry. And so we were just going to print that. But then, I think the night before we ran the story, he sent us a second statement, which is the statement we ended up printing in the story, which was a little bit more angry, and accused us of journalistic malpractice, different stuff like that.
Yeah. Was that one filtered through his lawyer, or was that just straight from the man himself?
He emailed that directly to myself and the publisher. So he does care a lot about what people think about him.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that this is kind of like a new kind of reporting. And so it seems like he's around 70, right? He's kind of an older guy.
Yeah, he'll be 70 in December.
Okay. So it seems like, this kind of, people actually reporting on his abusive actions, it's kind of catching him off guard. So he's, he spent 65 years or so doing whatever he wants, and now suddenly he's being held accountable.
Well, he's had a couple incidents too that got the public intox and the DUI.
Sure.
Well, yeah, and then there was it didn't involve him personally, but there was one of the things that's covered in the piece is a lawsuit that was brought against a manager that worked for him and a restaurant that he owns in 2012. And the details in the complaint are really scandalous. And I was surprised when I got my hands on it that, this isn't something that was leaked to me or something that I got that was hard to get,
It's public record, yeah.
It's probably the case shows up in the Iowa courts online system, and anybody with access to that could find it. So I was surprised that a lot of this had never been really reported before, and that the closest he ever came to bad press really was the kind of flippant City View column about his DUI in 2017.
Right.
Or his OWI that he eventually pled out of, I think. But yeah, no, he's a very powerful person. Yeah, has been given a lot of rope and is used to getting reports in the press. Well, because it's also it's about a change in food reporting. I think a lot of investigative reporters for years and years, and probably even now, would think that reporting on somebody like Gerleman would be below them. That they focus most of their investigative prowess on government activities, things that taxpayers are responsible for, that meaningful to them. But like I showed in the piece, when you look into Gerleman's history, taxpayers have as much invested in the growth and success of Gerleman's businesses as they do in, a government program that gives out food or something, because it's been taxpayer money, federal and local, that has been spent to ensure this success. It's been given to him when he's asked.
Right, and he wouldn't have built up his fortune without help from local government.
Right, and a lot of this reporting has focused on nationally known restaurants that usually are focused on cities like New York and San Francisco and stuff. Like there was a recent piece a few weeks, I think, before we published the Gerleman piece about Mission Chinese in New York and how it's like a very popular restaurant in New York that was considered very cool for a long time. And this piece just came out in Eater, the food blog, that was really focused on how terrible people who worked there were treated, and how terrible and dysfunctional of a place it was to work. So this kind of reporting is becoming more and more in vogue when it comes to like subjects that are powerful enough to feel that they merit the focus. But it's people like Gerleman or restaurateurs who thrive and have millions and millions of dollars in assets and property and employees in cities like Des Moines that don't get a lot of national focus for any reason at all, that are still left in the dark for the most part and still could really benefit from this kind of reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine, with the kind of environment that's been fostered at the Jethro's locations, that the turnover is probably fairly high. Did you, I'm trying to be careful. Like I don't want any of your sources to be exposed either. But did you have trouble like finding people to talk about this, or were there like hundreds of people lining up?
Yeah, I guess there weren't hundreds. According to Gerleman, he employs something around like 700 or 800 people. But there was enough that a lot of people came to talk to me. In fact, I started talking to the first few people that I sourced in the story just by tweeting about it. In June, I tweeted, hey, if anybody knows anybody who worked for Jethro's or any of these other restaurants and has heard a weird story like the first story that opens the piece or wants to talk about their experience there, I'd love to talk to you. And that got me started with just a few people, former managers and former employees who jumped into my mentions and were like, hey, this happened to me. This is the interactions I had with Bruce or Cynthia or like these other people. But also, this other stuff happened to like my friend who also worked there. A lot of people, that's the other thing about a place like Des Moines is that when you employ as many people as like a large restaurant group like Jethro's does, you end up employing a lot of people who go on to do other things, And
right.
One thing that I thought was interesting was when I was requesting different records from the county records keepers, one of the women I spoke to there was pulling the documents for me and was like, "Oh, I used to work at Jethro's," And so, she was like, "I'm very interested to see what you get out of these documents." But yeah, and I think like one really important source was somebody who I spoke with who worked at Jethro's for a long, long time, like about a decade, and was very high up in the organization and was able to be kind of an authoritative bridge figure that connected a lot of dots for me. But yeah, it wasn't as hard as you think. And I think that after such a long time and so long of Bruce Gerleman just getting only good press, I think people were just kind of fed up with the way that he was painted, and they wanted people to hear their stories, but they didn't personally want to get sued.
Yeah.
Well, sure.
Yeah. I will say I'm pretty new to Des Moines and definitely not very well connected, but I had heard at least the first story in the piece through social media. So it's definitely been going around. And my sister, I think, knows a couple of employees as well who have said some things, but
yeah, it's like, yeah, everybody has a story, and a lot of them are very similar to the ones included in the piece.
I would love to see similar stories about, restaurant owners in Cedar Rapids, perhaps movie theater owners in Cedar Rapids.
You have a couple of leads there.
I could possibly, but yeah, I mean, every person that's worked like a service job has experienced something like this. Like that's just the nature of like people who run businesses. They tend to be somewhat tyrannical. In some cases, it's very reckless, like personal interactions, like Bruce Gerleman.
Right.
And in Iowa, like the towns aren't that big. Like the word's going to get around, and they've been getting away with it for decades.
Right. The deeper issue here, obviously, is like, what do you do with the kind of horrible workplace hierarchies that basically are like essential functions of capitalism?
Yeah.
As far as like what you do about that, I don't that's a little outside of my scope.
Yeah.
But I think maybe, if there is the threat of more reporting like this, or even just like, I think really what it comes down to, what makes a story like this happen is a willingness for institutions and reporters to publish anonymous sources more, because that's the only way that you can really get people to share their lived experiences in a way that would otherwise, if you were to source them by name, would
ruin their life. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it would hurt them professionally or hurt them in some other way, or cause them to receive attention that they don't want. And the thing is that it's not like an unheard of practice in media.
Anonymous sourcing.
Right. Well, how often do you read like a CNN article that is about the president or about a political figure during the caucuses or something, and it's like, a key staffer from blah 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 spoke on the condition of anonymity to so they could speak freely, stuff like that. That kind of stuff happens all the time, and I think it makes. Well, I mean, you can argue whether that makes political reporting better, but I think it would be a better practice to bring towards reporting on things like restaurants and industry stuff like that, which is also something that's changing. Food writing and food reporting is moving past what a lot of people would consider frivolous, or just like reviews about the food or stuff like that. It's more of like it's starting to take a shape where there's more of a focus on who's really behind the food and who's, what's really happening to the people who are really running these restaurants. And I think it's kind of a reaction to the sort of food hero lionization that's happened in the past like couple decades or so.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like the restaurant industry is like specifically suited for taking advantage of employees. Just like specifically like going to Jethro's, it's always like packed as hell. And so the employees are already pushed, they're already spread pretty thin, you can tell. And it's like they're under like immediate demands.
Yeah, I'd say like that's one of like the reasons why, another reason why it felt important to talk about Jethro's, because they were one of the first and most powerful restaurants to really open their doors all the way up after the original COVID lockdown. And there seems to be like a big willingness there to stay open and get customers in there as much as possible. And I live near Jethro's. I drive, driving around Des Moines, I drive past different Jethro's. They're all still packed.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I've eaten at the one off of the interstate. I don't remember like where that is.
They're all kind of off the interstate.
Yeah. Well, one of them then. It's been a few years, but well, I guess. Do you have any recommendations for alternative barbecue sources in Des Moines?
Man, that's a issue. I used to really love this place called Woody's.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood, and it closed because the owner died and the guy who took it over died.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it was a very unfortunate turn of events, but it was great barbecue, and that sucks. Smokey D's used to be off Ingersoll, but they relocated because real estate prices are going up down there. I would say one place I would recommend is this kind of catering group that you can order individual meals from that operates in the Sherman Hill neighborhood called Palms Caribbean. It's not barbecue, but it is really great jerk chicken and Jamaican food. Barbecue places in Des Moines and Iowa in general, there's a lot of them. They're all over the place. Jamaican food, I think, is a little harder to find, and it's really, really good. And if you like barbecue, then you'll probably really like Jamaican food too. Yeah. So I would also recommend that.
Nice. People, check it out. Well, since Natalie had to go, I know she wanted to ask about this. Aaron, since you recently did some work for The Intercept, what did you do to get Glenn Greenwald fired?
Yeah, speaking of anonymous sources.
Well, freelance reporters and freelance contractors are not consulted in such things. I was not privy to any knowledge about what happened, and I've been reading all the articles about behind the scenes happenings to try to get some information, just like everybody else. And considering what's happened to me and my history with cancel culture,
Yes.
I'm always interested to hear about what guys who make a lot more money than me have to say about it. I will say that The Intercept has been super cool to work with. They have been great at paying me, which is one of my most important things. And they've also, I like, when you are a freelance reporter, you work with a lot of different editors, and you get to realize that a lot of different people have different editing styles and the way they do things. And I really like working with the editors that I've worked with there. I think that one of Glenn Greenwald's main charges in his quitting was that The Intercept was biased towards Joe Biden.
Yes.
And their refusal to allow him to just publish whatever he wanted about Hunter Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And that has not been my experience. I didn't write anything specifically about Joe Biden except the fact that he lost pretty badly in Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not been censored in any way. I will say that. But I wish Glenn the best of luck with his Substack. I have a Substack too. It's called Ways of Eating. AaronCalvin.substack.com. I write about food stuff there too sometimes, but not as often anymore because I have to prioritize things that pay me more often.
Yeah, obviously. Well, since you brought up cancel culture, I feel like you would probably have a unique perspective on it. Do you feel that you were, quote, canceled?
Well, I wrote the whole Columbia Journalism Review essay in which I said that no, I was not canceled. I don't think anybody was really canceled. I don't think that cancel culture is a real thing, really. It's just and it's been funny to watch it become the favored topic of like I said, people who are much wealthier than me,
Right.
probably much wealthier than I'll ever be, and how they feel like their views or whatever they're being punished for their views. And I have yet to see a good example of somebody suffering materially because they have been quote unquote canceled.
In fact, the opposite in many cases.
Right. And I said this in the CJR essay. If I really wanted to, I probably could have found a good way to grift quote unquote cancellation or whatever, or done a full 180 and been after all the, conservative college football people got done screaming at me, been I've been canceled, subscribe to my YouTube channel.
Right. Well, you do have a Substack, which I've heard is grifting. So
well, I don't have a subscription program because I'm not that popular.
Sure.
So I'm not canceled because my Substack is still free.
There you go.
But yeah, I don't think it's real. I would obviously love a full-time job. That would be awesome. But I'm still getting work. I'm still getting paid. I have a great community and family who have stuck by me through all of this many strange and unfortunate events. But yeah, I don't believe in cancellation, and I frankly would challenge anybody to say this is real. I mean, after my incendiary reporting,
Very much.
Carson doubled the amount that he was able to contribute to the children with cancer, and he, as I understand, continues to run a successful foundation in which he continues to raise money, and apparently has a successful job in the roofing industry. So I think that we all came out of it okay, except for maybe the Des Moines Register. God bless them, I guess.
They may have lost some credibility in some people's eyes.
Well, it's my personal opinion that they couldn't win for losing in that situation. They definitely tried to see how badly they could lose.
Yeah, that was a no-win situation, I think, and they chose not maybe the least win,
Right. Yeah. In a situation with no good choices, it chose the worst ones each time, I think. like those Goosebumps novels where you choose your own adventure and well, they went to say page 2072 repeatedly and just died immediately.
They cheated even. They looked ahead to see which one would kill them, and they chose the death every time.
It looks like they're not going to have to worry about that competitor to Ragbri, though, because that looks like it's canceled this year and probably canceled foreseeable future.
That was a super admirable grift, and I was really interested to see...
Yeah, speaking of grifting.
I was really interested to see how that was going to play out, and it's unfortunate that COVID robbed us of the ability to watch that whole thing, which all indicators showed that it was going to fall right on his face.
Yeah. They were biking into a headwind. they're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
Just to be different.
Yeah, and that was just like a wild situation, and congratulations to that guy. For honestly, I think the thing there was that guy was in charge of Ragbri for so long and saw how much money that thing made and how much of that money went straight to Gannett,
right,
the Register's ownership corporation, and was like, I want more of this money, and he did not get it. But that's too bad.
It's worth a shot. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows how much longer even the Register or any of Gannett's huge local newspaper market will have to worry about any of this before their extreme liquidation.
Yeah, they're cutting to the bone. I mean, you can tell.
Well, if you read up on a lot of like the kind of insidery bits of their Gannett ownership's choices, speaking of no-win situations, even before COVID, the interest on the loan that Gannett took on in order to absorb all of those Gatehouse papers in 2019 was a huge, extremely optimistic thing to think that they would be able to pay off. And after the pandemic hit, it's looking very, very bad. So that probably won't go well. We'll probably, I'm sure we'll see some more fallout from that. And I don't want to appear, I guess, like, obviously I have nothing nice to say about the Register outside of a few like decent reporters, but I do think that local journalism is really, really important. And I think that it should be funded in a sustainable way. And I don't know how it's possible to get to that place, but we're going the opposite direction currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that could be the subject for a much longer discussion. But we've been going for a little over an hour now, so I think we should probably wrap up this episode of Rock Hard Caucus. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. You are much more experienced in this world than we are, so I feel like you have a lot of perspective to offer us, and I appreciate you joining us tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed our discussion.
And once again, the name of the piece that we were discussing is Sexual Harassment, Booze, and Barbecue Inside Bruce Gerleman's Restaurant Empire, written by our friend here, Aaron Calvin, at iowainformer.com. Where else could people find your work, Aaron?
AaronCalvin.com. That's AaronCalvin.com, AaronCalvin.com.
Yep. Spelled how it sounds, AaronCalvin.com. I do think Aaron's tweets are very nice, and you may enjoy following him there as well.
At Aaron P. Calvin. Don't believe what you heard. My tweets are very tame.
Yeah, not particularly offensive from what I've seen. Not worthy of being fired from a newspaper, if you were asking my opinion.
I'm going to put that one on my website.
Yeah, something tells me it wasn't really about the tweets.
No. It was cozy under that bus, I'll tell you that much.
All right, well, I think that'll do it for us tonight. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks, Evan, for co-hosting with me. Thank you, Natalie, for joining us for a little bit tonight. And we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
God bless.
Jethro's Barbecue, real Texas barbecue, smoked low and slow just for you. Barbecue, smoked all night, ready for the day. Just a sandwich or a pound you can take away. Jethro's Barbecue, Jethro's Barbecue, real Texas barbecue. Jethro's Barbecue.